India as a case study for you, how different is than the other societies and other countries?
In the average democracy, religious attendance might be 20 or 30% of people are religious. In India, it's 95% of people are religious. The average democracy is very secular and individualistic, whereas India is much more traditional.
Yoga, meditation, they all come from the ancient history which the whole world is accepting at the moment.
Well, the word yoga is interesting because the English cognate for that is yoke. I'm not saying that Indian intellectuals are actually anti-India.
Few of them.
They don't. No, I've not seen a single one who hates his or her country. Right. The issue of foreign-funded NGOs having to make disclosures. Okay, that's become a big issue in India. The only place I've been out on my own on foot is Varanasi.
Okay.
I had 1 week between events. I'm not Hindu. I'm not religious at all. But I've told my wife I want to be cremated in Varanasi. And I can't imagine a better resting place for my remains than for my ashes to be scattered. And I don't say that as a Hindu. I don't say that to please anybody. It's just a feeling I had.
Any of the Hindi words that you have picked up?
Dhanyavad.
Voice aajKal, our medium, your message.
Good day, everyone. My name is Navneet Anand from Voice aajKal, our medium, your message. And the conversation that I'm going to have today would be very, very different to the normal and regular ones that I do. Here in studio, I have got Salvatore Babones. Did I pronounce it right?
Absolutely correct.
Italian, Greek. It's a combination of the two. Tell me about the history.
Pretty typical in the United States. My Greek father's family came to the United States just after World War I. My Italian mother's family came earlier in the 1880s. My father's family from Connecticut, my mother's family from New Jersey, they met in Manhattan, and I was one of the results of that union. So I'm named for my maternal grandfather, Salvatore. It should be in Italian, but of course we anglicize it to Salvatore. And Babones should be Vevonis in Greek, but we anglicize it to Babones. So I'm all American. No one in my family speaks Greek or Italian. We only speak English, and it's a pretty typical American story.
You know, as we normally say, the world is a global village now. And look at you, Italian mother, Greek father, born and raised in America, now in Australia.
Well, people say it's a global village, but both my own personal history and in my own academic work, I would say it's an American village in that I may live in Australia, but Americans in Australia don't become Australian. They don't take up an Australian accent. They don't indigenize in any way. The same way when my mother and my father's family came to the U.S., they didn't retain any connection with Greece or with Italy. They became Americans. The American identity is so absorbing that people from all places in the world simply become absorbed into America if they go to America, and they remain American if they go abroad.
Talking about the Italian and the Greek background that you had 150 years ago, anyone still speak those languages at home?
Not at all. Zero.
When did you visit Italy or Greek the last?
Oh, I spent 2019 on sabbatical in Rome at La Sapienza University of Rome, but I have no connection to family whatsoever. I simply went as an academic. I teach at the University of Sydney and was privileged to have a year of research in Italy. It was wonderful.
You know, if I take you back to the childhood memories, the early years of education, you decided to become an academician. How did it happen? Tell me about the early years first.
My whole life from elementary school till age 18, I was going to be an astronomer.
Oh,
Loved
okay.
astronomy, went to the Hayden Planetarium in New York City, to the Museum of Natural History in New York, and loved the planets. All my early reading books were early reading astronomy books. Other kids had books about trains or superheroes. I had books about the sun, the moon, literally the early reader astronomy series that we would go get at the planetarium. And it was at university that I really realized that it wasn't big science and the world of the stars that I was really interested in. It was the world of humanity, and that's what led me to change from being an astronomy major to a sociology major. Over time, I became a very statistically oriented sociologist. So I also did a master's degree in applied mathematics, but I'm not a mathematician. I use that in my social science research.
Right. So you spent most of the time in the early age in New York.
In the greater New York area, though in America, the greater New York area includes Florida. I spent some time also growing up in Florida. We lived in several different suburbs and as well as in Central Florida, but East Coast. Yeah.
Central Florida of that time versus Central Florida of today and New York. What is the basic difference that you see?
I honestly can't tell you. I've lived in New South Wales
Oh,
longer than I lived in any one state in the United States. So I haven't been back to Florida really, except to visit Disney World. I haven't been back to Florida since I graduated high school. I go back to New York, of course. Traveling through. My family is mostly in New York, New Jersey, Boston. So I do get back to the New York area, but it's really hard for me to say. Obviously, we've seen the massive rise in technology that's happened globally, not just in the US. But mostly the American life centered around the automobile, the massive grocery store, and the shopping mall honestly hasn't changed much in the last 30 or 35 years. 40 years. I guess I have to count the years now. In the last 40 years, I don't see any really huge difference. I know that's not the answer maybe anyone else would give, but it looks very much the same.
New South Wales, as you said, that you spent more time here in New South Wales, but you still have that American accent.
Absolutely. Americans don't lose their accent. Other people adjust to us. My closest Australian friend constantly complains that her little kids all learn American words from television and don't speak proper Australian. And in the same way, people will adjust to us. So if I pass a parking garage, you're not going to say no, it's a car park. You're going to say, oh yes, the parking garage. And so and this is something that has entered into my own academic work, and that the American identity is completely absorbing. So about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called American Tianxia, writing about the Chinese concept of the world as a single tianxia, all under heaven, is the
Mhm.
Chinese term for it. And of course, Chinese foreign policy discourse imagines that American hegemony will be replaced by a benign Chinese tianxia. And I told them, well, no, you're right about the tianxia being the future, but it won't be a Chinese tianxia. It'll be
Okay.
an American tianxia, because the Chinese people moving, I mean, obviously here to Australia, but in even larger numbers to the US, or if they move to Canada, they become absorbed in an American centric world. Chinese institutions adjust to American standards. In academia, all across China, universities have been reoriented on American models. They publish in American style academic journals. Whether they publish in American journals or when they've set up their own Chinese journals, they've set them up on the American model, taking exactly the American framework for how a academic journal works and simply doing it in China and in English. They don't want to publish in Chinese. So what they're doing is reproducing an American world in China. Now, of course, it'll have local differences. There's a sociological concept called globalization, where
Mhm.
what's global becomes localized, and that is true. But fundamentally, these are American structures that are being uh, sent out to the rest of the world, and even more so now with the rise of the internet, the online world, AI. American innovations are shaping how the world works, even among the greatest challengers to the United States. They challenge the United States on American terms using American style technologies uh, in ways that are structured, social structured, like the United States. And that's true of not just daily life, but also government institutions, and how security services are run. How the creation. In the United States, there is a national security advisor that was founded way back in the 1950s. Well, now every major power in the world has a national security advisor structured on the U.S. National Security Council. They may hate America. Their National Security Council may be planning to overthrow America, but they're doing it using American-style institutions.
America being the world power, and everybody aspired to be a successful businessman or in academics in US. But in your case, it has turned out to be you chose down under.
I chose the weather, honestly. I was teaching at University of Pittsburgh, and I wanted a much warmer place to teach. I was offered a fantastic job in Australia, and Australia has been very good to me. But it's also very familiar to me because before I arrived in Australia, I came in 2008. If you were to look at Australian universities in the 1970s, 80s, even the 1990s, they much more resembled old British universities.
Mhm.
Starting in the 2000s, they Americanized and they changed their governance structures towards governance structures that are similar to that of U.S. universities. To the point where today, there's really very little difference an academic would notice moving from a U.S. university to an Australian university. I'm very at home in Australian universities, and that subtle Americanization is something that carries through everywhere. I mean, so you take India for an example. In India, India is the fastest growing large country in the world. It accounts for a massive percentage of global growth, but that growth is occurring in sectors where people are developing businesses on an American business model. They're Indian people working in India, but they're working in American-style corporations organized in ways that were pioneered in the United States, using forms of technology and organization that were pioneered in the United States. That is, they are internalizing the structure, not the values. They're not becoming like Americans in the way they think. Their values are Indian. Their languages are Indian, but the social structures in which they operate are increasingly born in America or made in America social structures.
I'm a proud Australian with the Indian heritage who came to Australia in 1995. Still at home, we do follow all the rituals that we used to do
Sure.
back home as well. Now I have rather two homes, Australia as well as India. Talking about your role with the current university that you're working with, what exactly is it?
I am an associate professor of sociology at the University of Sydney. I teach Australian social policy, of all the ironies in the world, but I take a global and comparative perspective to teaching Australian students about their own social policies in Australia. I also teach our quantitative methods curriculum. So I teach undergraduate and postgraduate social statistics. So that's my teaching side of my role. On the research side, I've just finished a major book on Indian democracy. So for the last 5 years, I've been researching, doing as much as possible quantitative, but also historical comparative research on on this fundamental question of how India alone among post-colonial states was born a democracy and remained a democracy throughout its entire history. And that's one of the great puzzles of social science, and that's what the new book is about. The book also debunks a lot of myths about the supposed decline in Indian democracy. I see very little evidence, I would say, frankly, no evidence of any decline in Indian democracy over the last 15 years. The quantitative evidence just isn't there. It contradicts all of that. But I also have done research on Australian universities. I wrote a book called Australia's Universities, Can They Reform? Spoiler alert, the answer is no. They can't reform. They've become very warped by both international student money and vice chancellor ambitions. But again, the book's a data-driven book about the rankings. And my previous book was on the BRICS economies. Previous book, that was the American Tian Sha book. But what ties them all together is an interest in international comparisons. In the private sector, people are used to the idea of benchmarking. How do you know if your company is doing well? You compare it to other companies in your sector. Is 8% a good return on assets? Well, it might be in one industry. It might be a terrible return on assets in another industry. How do you know if it's good? You see what your competitors are achieving. The same principle, in my view, should be applied to social science research. If a journalist is in prison, is that the end of democracy? Well, things go wrong everywhere. Someone's always in prison for some reason. A government may overstep its bounds. I don't want to know, is a journalist in prison? I want to know, how many journalists per 100 million people are in prison? For what reasons? And how does that compare to the number of journalists per 100 million people who are in prison in other countries? That is, we want to benchmark them. No country's democracy is perfect, or for that matter, when I did my BRICS book, no country's development trajectory is perfect. We need to benchmark middle income countries like the BRICS economies against each other to understand how they're performing. So virtually everything I do academically is in some way ultimately an exercise in benchmarking, or as we call it, quantitative comparative social science.
When we're talking about the decline in Indian democracy,
Mm.
I think there's a narrative being set by certain media
Yeah.
channels and by the certain countries as well. They may have their own agendas to achieve something out of it. How can that be countered
So it's not
to
the
bring the truth out?
it's not the countries that have an agenda, what they've made, to the extent that anyone has heard of me in India, it's for the one notorious claim that it's India's intellectuals who are anti-India. Right? And that went viral. And it went viral because Indians have a preconception about this, but it was my way of explaining to people where these rankings come from. So there are four major democracy rankings. One of them is done by a single emeritus professor in the United States. It's called the Polity 5 evaluations. In the Polity 5 database, India is rated 9 out of 10 as a democracy. It's rated higher than the US, which is rated 8. That was before Trump. It was rated 8. Australia is rated a 10. Right? So India is placed somewhere between the US and Australia as a very high quality democracy. That person has no connection to India. He's just looking at the numbers. It's a purely quantitative evaluation being done. Sorry, it is, I should say that it is partially subjective, but it's on a highly rigid evaluation system of, does India have this? Does it have this? Does it have this? Then it qualifies. The second best ranking for India is the Economist Intelligence Unit. The Economist Intelligence Unit rankings are done by about a couple dozen, maybe 30 people who work for the Economist Intelligence Unit or write for The Economist, who get together in a conference room and hash it out. How do they evaluate each of these dimensions of democracy? No connection to India. India on that ranking scores about at the bottom of the European Union. It would score like an Eastern European country. Pretty good. Not as well as the rich Western, Northwestern European countries, but as good as an Italy or a Greece, or a Poland. All right, fine. That doesn't have a strong connection to India. The next ranking for India is the Freedom House, Freedom in the World rankings. There, India is only like number 70. I think it's 76 in the world. It's relatively low, much lower than all of Europe, all of North America, all of Oceania. I mean, 76 in the world puts it, at the level of a mediocre Latin American country. Remember, there are only about 180 countries being ranked. To be number 76 means you're about as bad as you can get and still be a democracy. I mean, all those other countries are not democracies at all. Well, where do they get their data from? Yes, they're based in Washington, but they use country experts from countries around the world to inform them about their countries. So they're getting inputs from India, but they're making the decision in Washington. They rank India number 76. What's the worst ranking of all? The Varieties of Democracy Institute in Sweden relies almost entirely on in-country experts. They poll political scientists in India about India. They poll political scientists in Brazil about Brazil. They give them a series of questions to answer about their country. They rate India number 105 in the world. Okay,
Oh,
now that's getting zero input from the Swedes. In India, when the VDEM, as it's summarized as VDEM, Varieties of Democracy, when the VDEM Institute rankings come out, they always say in the Indian media, Sweden ranks India number 105. Sweden ranks India worse than, fill in the blank. But it's not Sweden ranking India. Sweden's just compiling the data. Those are Indians ranking India. Okay, so the question is, which Indians ranking India? These are professors at major universities who believe that there's been a major decline in Indian democracy in their subjective opinion. But let's face it, how many political science professors at Indian universities, how many of them vote BJP? Okay, very, very few, very, very few. And so they've viewed the coming of Narendra Modi as a cataclysm for Indian democracy. In many ways, they rate India as worse than the emergency. They always rate India as worse than during the 1950s, the Nehruvian democracy. And they rate India worse than the US under Jim Crow segregation. I could give example after example. They rate India as um, well, by far worse than any other country that actually has elections. To get worse than India, you have to not have elections at all, pretty much. But those are Indians making that evaluation. Now, it's not all Indians. It's not a survey of the Indian population. The Indian population is highly nationalistic. When we survey the Indian population, they're very happy with Indian democracy. When we survey Indians, do they believe in their democracy? They absolutely do. But India's experts don't.
No, you made a very, very strong statement a few minutes ago. Intellectuals.
Yeah.
They are mostly anti-Indians. What I could feel and sense is there was a clamp on a lot of NGOs that were being funded by the foreign bodies.
Yeah.
Could that be one of the reasons?
Well, I'll give you. So first of all, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that Indian intellectuals are actually anti-India.
Few of them.
They don't. They no. I've not seen a single one who hates his or her country.
Mhm.
Right. But they have a negative view of their country. So they're anti-India is a shorthand for saying they have a negative view of their country. They view their country in very negative terms. Now, you raise a good point. The issue of foreign-funded NGOs having to make disclosures. Okay, that's become a big issue in India. The Varieties of Democracy Institute specifically cites that, and Freedom House specifically cite that as a reason why freedom of association has come under threat in India. Yet, if you receive foreign funding to do anything politically relevant in Australia, you have to declare it.
Yep.
If you do that in the United States, you have to declare it. Not only that, when I explained this in India 3 years ago, the print immediately went and looked up the fact that I, Salvatore Babones, am a registered foreign agent in
Oh.
both Australia and the United States. Okay. Now, how much money did I take? $4,000. Okay, so they put it on the top of the website. American academic Salvatore Babones, sociologist Salvatore Babones, is a foreign agent. Now they know, all of us know, foreign agent just means you've done some work for a foreign entity, and being a good, law-abiding person, I declared it. Now, if I can declare that, I don't have a lawyer. I don't have a firm. I made $4,000. And for anyone in India, like, okay, I know that might be a year's wage for many people in India, but in Australia, $4,000 doesn't go very far. It's about 2% of my annual income. I did the paperwork and declared it. So why can't Amnesty International India do that paperwork? Why can't Human Rights Watch India do that paperwork? They're, yelling bloody murder over having to disclose this funding. When I, as a private citizen, disclose it, what's so bad about that?
There were few of them who were returning their awards that they were given by the previous.
Yeah. But not only that, Australia. So the personal issue. Okay, it makes good media. Australia is well recognized as a quality democracy. Every democracy ranking rates Australia very high. No one says there's lack of freedom of association in Australia. But in Australia, if you receive foreign government funding,
we have to declare
you have to declare it. It's simply a matter of course. You have to declare it. So why is that a problem for Indian democracy if it's not a problem for Australian democracy?
India as a case study for you, how different is than the other societies and other countries?
Dramatically different. So I'm studying democracies. India is by far, and I mean by far, the world's poorest democracy. If by democracy we mean you've continued to have elections for more than 20 years. I mean, there are countries that are poorer than India that had one election recently. If to have an well-established, if you've been a democracy since the year 2000, India is by far the poorest country. It's also much more religious than other democracies. So if I compare, the typical democracy is about 20 times as wealthy as India per capita. In the average democracy, religious attendance might be 20 or 30% of people are religious. In India, it's 90, 95% of people are religious. The average democracy is very uh, uh, secular and individualistic, whereas India is much more traditional. People, on the simple question of should you respect your parents to be a good person, I think it's something, I forget the number, but it's over 95% of Indians. It's like 98% of Indians say you have to respect your parents. Well, in Australia, you wouldn't get 98% of people saying you have to respect your parents. So it's a very different electorate. It's than other democracies. As a result, it has different politics than other countries because the voters are different,
What is it?
but not because the institutions are different. The institutions, just like I said, the Indian National Security Council is very similar to the US National Security Council. The institutions are the same. It's the voters who are different. And you get different outcomes because people want different things from life in India than they want in Australia or the United States or Germany.
We normally say Australia is a multicultural society, US is a multicultural society. But if you look at India, from where I come
No,
from,
India is multicultural, not
it's,
the, yeah.
it's multicultural.
Yeah.
The number of languages,
Yeah.
after every 50 kilometers, there's a different language, different food, different talks.
So first, the U.S. isn't multicultural at all. The U.S. is an assimilationist country. After one generation, people assimilate. The best example of that is Muslim Americans.
Mhm.
Muslims have had a lot of difficulty integrating in Western Europe, in the United Kingdom,
Mhm.
here in Australia. They've been separationist, living separately, marrying separately, staying within their own community. The U.S. Muslim population has fully integrated.
Mhm.
There's none of this separateness and none of the hostility. Notice you don't see Islamist terror attacks
So did it
by
take
American
number of
Muslims.
generations? Or?
One generation.
Okay.
Right? You don't see in the United States American Muslims engaging in terrorism.
Hmm.
In France, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, to a much lesser extent, but even here in Australia, there has been Islamist extremism. You don't see it in the United States. All the Muslim terrorists in the United States came from Saudi Arabia, right? They weren't Americans. So America is an assimilationist culture. Even the most difficult to assimilate groups very quickly assimilate in the United States. Australia has a policy of official multiculturalism, but it's relatively weak in that people still go to school in English. People are still expected to embrace Australian values. It will take a lot longer for non-Anglo communities in Australia to assimilate. It will happen, but it may take 2 or 3 generations. It took 2 or 3 generations, for example, for Greeks and Italians in Australia to assimilate and become fully Australian. In the US, no, it takes 1 generation and you're American. In India, of course, there's a true multiculturalism.
Mhm.
That's officially maintained. That is, if you go to elementary education in any state in India, you're going to get that education in your own native language. You're going to, and even the unifying factor of Hindu faith is practiced differently in different states in India. So although outsiders may call them all Hindu, and although Indians may have adopted that language of calling it all Hindu as a single religion, in reality, there are many local Hinduisms within the broader Hindu faith in India. Islam is better integrated across India because of the 19th century Muslim reform movements like the Deobandi movement that sought to instill a single version of Islam. Before the 19th century, there were many different Islams in India as well. That's become more standardized. But nonetheless, India is an extremely multicultural country and the only truly multicultural country, I shouldn't say the only, one of the very few truly multicultural countries that has been able to sustain a democracy. Because the biggest threat to democracy is that democracies fall apart along linguistic or cultural lines. Look at what's happening in Belgium right now. Belgium is close to disintegrating between Flemish northern Belgium and Walloon southern Belgium. Look at Ireland, which has been divided between Protestant Northern Ireland and Catholic Ireland, for the Republic of Ireland. So these divisions between religion, divisions based on language, on perceived nationality, they have either divided, or in cases like Belgium and Spain, between Catalonia and the rest of Spain, have either divided or come very close to dividing countries. The only two really successful examples of multicultural democracies, I mean, really successful, nobody questions the country, there's no move towards secessionism, are India and Switzerland.
Hmm.
And how different can you get between India and Switzerland? But those are the two successful examples.
How many cities have you visited in India?
Very few, very few. I've also, I do not know India culturally on the ground. I know
Right.
India statistically and academically. I've visited several cities, but mostly to hotel conference centers or to give
Right.
lectures. The only place I've been out on my own on foot is Varanasi.
Okay.
I had 1 week between events, and I thought, where should I go with my 1 week? And a friend connected me with Banaras Hindu University, and I spent that week at Banaras Hindu University. And on my own, walking around Varanasi, first thing I did was walk down to the Ganges, to the Asi Ghat, and then walk
Yes,
along
yes, the
walk
Asighat,
along the
yeah.
river from there. There's a great video of me on YouTube feeding the cows at the Asi Ghat. I was there all by myself with the cows, and I'll tell you, some cows will eat grapes, but cows do not like grapes. That's all I had. I bought some grapes and I didn't have any vegetables to feed them. That's what they want. And some of the cows turned up their noses at my offering, but some liked it.
So did you get a chance to see the cremations being done at middle of the night?
I only from a distance. Look, to be respectful. It's not
Mm.
my family.
Mm.
I didn't want to go too close, and of course, people being cremated are people, and
Mhm.
they're really meaningful to their loved ones, and
So
so
they're done on the ghats.
I know I didn't want to do it as a tourist.
Mm.
I think it's something I would not photograph. I would not.
Mm.
So I saw it, but at a very respectful distance. I didn't see it up close.
I have not been able to travel to Varanasi myself so far. It's on my to-do the list, on the top of it, visiting Banaras.
I've told my wife, no, I'm not Hindu, I'm not
Mhm.
religious at all,
Mhm.
but I've told my wife I want to be cremated in Varanasi as my ideal. When I pass away, if I could choose, just because it was such, the as a complete atheist, the
Mhm.
closest I've come to a spiritual experience was visiting Varanasi. And I can't imagine a better resting place for my remains than for my ashes to be scattered in the Ganges. And I don't say that as a Hindu. I don't say that to please anybody. It's just a feeling I had when I was there that, I don't want to be buried in some random cemetery in Sydney where nobody will ever visit me. I'd rather be, well, returning to what many of us believe is the oldest human
Mhm.
settlement in the world, going back to the beginning.
The number of books that you have written, what are you reading these days?
I'm mostly reading books about India. My current book I'm reading is about Bihar and the so-called Jungle Raj of Bihar, 1990 to 2005. But I read pretty much all of the new books that come out in Indian democracy, especially the Indian books. Whenever I travel to India, I load up with 10 or 20 books to bring back. I'm just beginning a new research project on the sociology of Hinduness.
Mhm.
Not a theology. I'm not a
Yep, yep.
theologian. I don't read Sanskrit. I would
Mhm.
never pretend.
Mhm.
But the sociology of Hinduness, by which I mean, for example, what's the relationship between the Hindu faith and the caste system?
Mhm.
Or, for example, how do uh, how do Hindus in the diaspora practice religion versus Hindus in India? So these kind of sociological questions are ones I'd like to tackle. The major book on the sociology of the Hindu faith that scholars still refer to is by Max Weber, published in, I believe it was around the time of World War I, so around 1910 to 1920. It's time for a a more modern view of what the Hindu faith is. And I've enjoyed my work on India so much that I'm viewing this as a fantastic 5-year learning experience.
Hmm.
Don't ask me for answers now.
Yeah.
Ask me in 2030, because just as my current book on Indian democracy, I started in 2020 with no knowledge of Indian democracy. I came to it with a knowledge of the international rankings. My expertise was the rankings. My expertise was not India. In the same way, I have no expertise on Hindu faith. I'm going to develop that expertise over the next 5 years, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
You know, talking about Hindus, I normally say Hinduism is not a religion, it is way of living.
Well, that's why I don't use the word Hinduism.
Right.
And I'll say Hinduness. Of course, the controversial word is Hindutva,
Hindutva.
but
yeah,
that's become politically
that's right.
contentious.
Mhm.
But it's Hindu faith is a pre-Abrahamic view of religion, and I think the problem with most Western sociology of religion is that it begins with Christianity as what a religion is. A religion is something that has a holy book, that people profess a creed, they say a specific prayer, they worship in churches, they have every week a religious attendance, and that informs our idea of religion so deeply that even international surveys, when they ask about religiosity, our standard measure of religiosity that is used globally is, do you attend weekly religious services? Now, of course, in the Hindu faith, there aren't weekly
No.
religious services. So that question has virtually no relevance to the Hindu world. Yet, because the Western mindset is so informed that the paradigm for religion is Christianity, it's baked into it. And of course, it works for Judaism, it works for Islam, because both of those also have weekly
That's right.
religious services. So coming to think of the Hindu faith, you have to think, as a Westerner, you have to think more of ancient Greece. Because of course, the Hindu faith in origin is essentially the same as ancient Greek or Roman
Mhm.
religion. We know the Indo-European languages. Now, I don't want to get into the debate out of India or from Central Asia into India. Frankly, for me as a sociologist, it doesn't matter whether the Indo-European languages came to India in 1000 BC or
Or
left from India in
from
1000
India,
BC. But we know that the Greek language, the Latin language, and Sanskrit are all fundamentally the same language, that share a core vocabulary, that share a core grammar. So we know these faiths were all the same. Of course, the difference is that Westerners gave up their organic faith and accepted this external faith of Christianity, a new religion, or later on accepted Islam, a new religion, whereas most Indians retained their ancestral faith. And so I think as a Westerner trying to understand Hindu faith, it makes much more sense to think back to what I read in high school and college about ancient Greece. That becomes my starting point for trying to comprehend Hindu practice.
You know, when we talk about India, yoga, meditation, they all come from the ancient history which the whole world is accepting at the moment.
Well, the word yoga is interesting because the English cognate for that
Mhm.
is yoke,
Hmm.
as in the yoke you put on cattle.
Yeah.
And so the yoga and yoke, and in Latin it's yugam.
Mhm.
It means self mastery, right? Whether it's each of these languages. Now, a yoke in English has come to mean something we put on someone else, like master someone else. But that sense of mastery, which in Indian yoga is mastery of the
Master
self, is
yourself,
common, common to all these words. So it actually illustrates this fact that Sanskrit and Western languages are fundamentally united. And in ancient times, they wouldn't have been very different. So a lot of if we want to understand, if we, not you, but if we as Westerners want to understand Indian religion, we have to forget Christianity and Islam and Judaism. We have to remember that our own ancestors were not Christians. They were Hindus. Now, they wouldn't have called themselves Hindus, but they worshipped in exactly the same way that Hindus have continued to worship for at least 3,000 years. If you want to say 20,000 years, I don't know.
No, yeah.
But we know that Hindus have been
3,000
worshiping in
years.
the same way for at least 3,000 years. And we know that because not only do we have the records in India, but we have the records in the Mediterranean of those forms of worship.
Hmm. India of today is commendable. For your keenness to know about the country, when did it exactly start?
Exactly is difficult to say. I say when I co-authored
Maybe
this
what
book.
was the turning point
Well,
that?
so when I co-authored the books in the BRICS economies,
Mhm.
and this is going back to I think we finished the book in 2016. Uh, I was very keen on the idea that India had development policies in place that would lead to India converging with China and the other middle income countries, so converging with China, Brazil, Mexico around the 2030s, certainly by 2040. And my own work on China had indicated Chinese growth would stop around 2020. I think I've been borne out in that view, and that India would then be catching up. So if you view India, instead of viewing India as being 1/4 as rich as China, if you look at the trajectories, India is 12 years behind China.
Okay.
So 12 years is not very long. Now,
When we say 12 years
12 years of growth.
of growth.
Yeah, India is where China was 12 to 14 years ago.
Mhm.
India's G20 summit. At India's G20 summit, it was at the exact point in GDP per capita that China was at the 2008 Olympics. And just like China had a big coming out party, the 2008 Beijing Olympics, India had its big coming out party, the G20 summit. So whether it's 12 years or 14 years, depending on what metric you want to use, it's just behind China on the trajectory. The thing is, China, its trajectory has stopped. China is no longer growing and has not been growing for 5 years. Um,
And
so
no
I started.
democracy as well.
Sorry.
And no democracy in the country.
Yes, but that's one of the reasons. But leaving that aside, I got interested in India because I thought, well, India has the right policies in place, the pro-growth policies, where the growth is essentially baked in. Um, I'll just give you a simple example for that. Right now, India's GDP per capita is almost identical to that of the African continent as a whole.
Mhm.
Almost the same GDP per capita. How many IITs are there in Africa? Does Africa have a unified national rail network? Does Africa have 24-hour electricity? Does Africa have universal sanitation? Right. So India has all of these far superior qualities to Africa, yet its productivity is still stuck down at African levels. Now, if India has all of these much better social indicators, I would expect the Indian economy to grow to the level of those indicators. Now, that's not just me, that's called endogenous growth theory. It's the dominant theory of economic development in the development economics profession today. So I expect India to grow to the level of a country that has those sorts of quality institutions and infrastructure. Beyond that, I don't know. Right beyond that, India has to continue to develop it. But right now, India has the policy set and the infrastructure. And I was writing this in 2016 that it would continue to grow for the next 20 years. Okay. Beyond that, all bets are off. After 2040, consult a psychic. Try to find out what the policies will be. Okay. So that got me interested in India. I started writing articles about Indian economic development. I just got interested, just try to piece things together. And in 2020, I believe it was, I wrote an article about the three farm acts that were highly controversial in India, led to the protests, the farm protests. And I titled this article, and I just thought it was an article about policy reform and reforming the agricultural sector as part of leading to growth in India. And I titled the article, India's Rich Farmers Block Pro-Poor Reforms. That was hugely controversial. I was called an apologist for Modi's fascism. All these insults hurled at me. The editor didn't want to publish it. I had a big struggle to get it published. And that's when I realized the real issue in India wasn't the economic development. Everyone agreed with me that India was the next big thing and it was rapidly growing. The big issue was the politics. That I just saw this as a good reform being blocked by people who were benefiting from the existing system. But by saying that, I was branded an apologist for fascism, a Modi supporter, a paid agent of the Indian government, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I realized I have to write this book on India. and the book became Dharma Democracy, how India became how India built the third world's first democracy. And it was all inspired. The book we got was inspired by the reaction to this article. I realized it was all about the politics, not about the policies.
To put it on record, the number of articles that you have written, Indian government did offer you some money at
No.
any point?
No. I had, so the one, and I declared it in both Australia and the United States. You can go look up the declarations. I was contracted for 4 months for $1,000 a month to advise an Indian media firm on how it could better place articles in the Western press. They wanted to access, and they knew I was a writer for many. I'd written for Foreign Affairs magazine, for Foreign Policy magazine, for Forbes, for the National Interest, and they wanted to know, how can we do this? Can you teach us how to do this? And I asked them, are you government funded? Because you only have to declare in Australia.
Oh, okay, yes, you're right.
I think in the US you have to declare no matter who it is, but in Australia it's only if it's government funded. I said, are you government funded? They said, we don't disclose the sources of our funding. I said, well, then I'll have to declare it. And they said, we don't mind. And so I said, okay, I'll declare it. So I don't know where that money came from, but
You were not directly paid by the Indian government.
no. Well, I wasn't even indirectly paid. I mean, I wasn't paid to write these articles. I was paid for advisory services.
That was purely your opinion.
Yeah, purely my opinion.
You know, in India, what I could see at the moment, there are two segments. One are pro-Modi, one is anti-Modi. Talking about pro-India or anti-India is a separate topic to be discussed altogether. But you got a chance. Probably you were the only one here in Australia who was given 15 minutes to have one-to-one
I was in the
chat.
room. There was one of about 12 people
All right.
who were in the room. We each had our short chat. And in fact,
How was that experience?
look, Mr. Modi was, the adjective I would use is that he was avuncular. He was like my kind uncle, wanting to be nice. Now, I spoke English. He replied, as many world leaders do. Even though he speaks English, he replied in Hindi, and it was translated to me in English. We talked about the rankings. So I published the reason he called me into the meeting was I'd published a major paper about democracy rankings and how they get India wrong. And I explained to him that India's problem is that it does not seize the data narrative. I'll give you an example, and I give the same example I gave to Mr. Modi. The Committee to Protect Journalists, which is a Western NGO, collects information about journalists who are in prison and journalists who are killed. They have an entire database for this. They're the ones who say that India has the worst record in the world for for safety for journalists. Now, because they collect the data, they can categorize it, they can say what they want about it. And you know why India has the worst record in the world? Because the total number of journalists who face death or imprisonment in India is larger than in any other country outside China. Now, why is it larger? Because India is 10 times larger than any country outside China. So if you normalize or standardize per billion population, India's rate of journalist deaths is actually lower than the United States. It's far lower than the world average. What's more, most of the journalists who are killed, they're not killed in government custody, right? So they make no distinction. Is the journalist killed by gangsters for reporting on their mistress, or is a journalist die in a government jail? They don't make a distinction between it. Now, if the Indian government published data, it could, and I told him, why don't you collect data on every journalist who's ever has a FIR filed, who's ever brought before a judge, who's ever imprisoned, who's ever convicted, ever imprisoned, and ever dies, do the investigation. If you publish the data, you can provide accurate information. You can establish an accurate database that academics and journalists, people who want to know about the status of journalism in India, they can go to the true official data. Then you have control of the narrative. I said India needs to do a much better job, whether it's economic statistics. Frankly, it's much easier to get Indian economic statistics from the World Bank or the IMF than to get them from India. The Indian websites are just impossible to use. Whether it's economic statistics, which are reasonably good in India, all the way down to social things like political issues like journalists, where the data just isn't collected. Now, if India collected and distributed these data, it would paint a much brighter picture of India, because the facts are in India's favor. It's only the interpretation that is then spun anti-India. India should be getting the facts out. And I told him this directly, and he took it on board. He listened. He said, we'll be in touch with you about this. And then I never heard from him again. Anyone who thinks I'm paid by the Indian government, I have a lot of trouble getting anything from the Indian government. Data, even. They all say, yes, we'd love to help you with data. We'd love to help you with, contact someone. I never, nothing. Never mind money.
If someone from the Indian government is listening, the data required by...
Look, I've been working with an Australian Eminence Greece, Maurice Newman. He is former chair of the Australian Stock Exchange, former chancellor of Macquarie University. Actually, most people would know him as a former chairman of the ABC.
Right.
He and I have started a think tank called the Indian Century Roundtable. We've been trying to raise funding. So far, all of our funding has come from individuals and foundations. We haven't received a cent of government funding. The Indian government does help fund a think tank at Melbourne University called the Australia-India Institute.
Yeah.
Hey, Indian government, I would love to start a New South Wales India Institute at the University of Sydney. I've not been able to attract any government interest from India or New South Wales in funding this think tank. So, for anyone who thinks I'm getting benefits from the Indian government, I get goodwill. I mean, whenever I say something positive about India, I get thank yous. I mean, I don't want to be totally. People do appreciate me. I've been very welcomed in India, but mostly I've received a lot of positive reinforcement from media organizations, from think tanks in India, from individuals in India. For this think tank effort that I've started, we've had some 300 individual donations, many of them from India, some of them down to $5 or $5 Australian dollars as donations.
Every single dollar counts.
Every dollar counts, and I thank every one of them. But no, this is not an Indian government-funded effort. Like any other academic in Australia, I teach my classes, and that affords me time free for research, and I do whatever research I please. I go in any direction I want.
Me coming as an international student in February 1995 to Australia, there are hundreds and thousands of international students who have come from India to study in Australia. But lately, I could see the shift. Australian universities going and setting up there.
Yes, unsuccessfully. The Australian universities that are setting up in India completely misunderstand the international education market. They've bought their own propaganda. They seem to believe that Indian and Chinese students and Nepali students are coming to Australia because of the fantastic education offered in Australia. The reality is they're coming to Australia to access the Australian labor market. I mean, let's just be frank about it. For some elite Chinese students, they're coming to Australia to have a nice 3 or 5 years in Australia because their parents can afford it. But for everyone else, and for the poorer Chinese students and for the vast majority of Indian and Nepali students, they're coming to access the Australian labor market. And of course, opening a branch campus in Gift City in Gujarat doesn't give you access to the Australian labor market. These branch campuses are simply going to fail. The same way that the Chinese branch campuses of 10, 15 years ago, all of them failed as well.
Back to Australia.
Yeah.
You've been here since 2008.
2008, 17 years.
Do you feel at home now?
Very much so. New South Wales is my home. I've been very much embraced by Australian society. I've met, I think, 5 former prime ministers. I have, I've spoken at many of the major think tanks in Australia. I'm regularly in the Australian media. I've been very much treated as a truly honored guest. And I say guest because I'm not Australian. Even without taking Australian citizenship, I've still been welcomed. So I mean, it's one thing for people like you. I assume you're an Australian citizen. It's one thing for people like you who've made a commitment to Australia, given up your prior citizenship and embraced Australia. For you to be accepted, all right, well, you are Australian. I'm not even Australian. And yet I've been welcomed with such open arms. I really feel very grateful to Australia.
Yes, I do as well, the same way. Before I wrap up, with your immense knowledge on Indian politics,
No, no, not at all.
sociology, trying to
I'm
understand
going
more.
to cut you off right there. I have a systematic knowledge of
Mhm.
Indian politics, but not very broad. So the difference is Indians who seriously follow Indian politics know at an incredibly greater depth than I do. What I do as an academic is try to ask in a structured way, statistically or systematically, what does something mean? I don't know the personalities. I
Mhm.
don't know the details. So I do not have an immense knowledge of Indian politics, but I do try to have an unbiased, systematic knowledge of Indian politics.
Unbiased is the right word. I think this is what we need at the moment, is India to be looked at unbiased,
Right.
and then make your decisions which are informed as well, are there to give informations to the others, not only the Indian diaspora as well as to the Western countries as well. Any of the Hindi words that you have picked up?
Dhanyavad. The sum total of my Hindi and all I've needed.
Okay. Finally, what's your favorite Indian food?
I am an entirely, 100%, a paneer person. So I will eat rotis, not rotis, dosas, and I will eat lentils, of course, all kinds of curries. But and I am a vegetarian, so it's very easy, for me to eat Indian food. But paneer. If we
Paneer.
go out for, I always would prefer a North Indian restaurant, and I'll always prefer, 3 different kinds of paneer with rice and naan. Yeah.
If you ever take a delegation from Australia during your visit to India, I would be absolutely happy to volunteer in there.
I don't
as and when
take
required.
delegations, but if you have if you want me to to come on your delegation, let me know. I'm happy to go. I think people assume that I have some larger role than I do. I'm not an administrator for the university. I'm just an ordinary academic doing workaday academic research. It's just that I'm working on a topic that it shocks me that other Westerners simply haven't taken up. I mean, I'm sorry to go on and on, but look at the depth of Western expertise on China and the number of true Western China experts who deeply understand the country, who spent decades studying China, who know China better than Chinese people. There's none of that in India. Virtually all of the Western expertise on India comes from non-resident Indians. There's almost no. There's some Westerners who study medieval Indian history, or who study Sanskrit language in a very technical way. I have not run into a single non-Indian origin academic who studies contemporary Indian politics other than myself, and that should change.
Thank you so much. I would be looking forward to the book in 2030, as you said.
The next book, yes.
The next book in 2030. My name is Navneet Anand. I had a wonderful conversation with Salvatore Babones.
Great to talk to you.
This is Navneet Anand signing off for aajKal, our medium, your message. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dhanyavad.
VT Times. Be with the times.